I know what you try to do. I know exactly what you try to do.
Fuel on the fire.
Have to redo all of our signs.
Yeah. I need a guarded
Idiots
beach
out
sign
there
at
as
my house.
lifeguards.
There is a bunch of material and a write-up attached to this under 9A, old business, establish a stormwater utility. And I'm not really going to use it. It's there for your reference. Most of the data you have gotten in one form or another as a reference. You have a hard copy of this presentation. The presentation itself has been taken from city records and the Florida League of Cities. There's some of it actually I wrote. And I'll try to identify that, but it's by and large hard data. I think a lot of you know that a lot of my life has been spent in manufacturing plants, and I'm always concerned with deferred maintenance, as I talked about or was talked about at the last budget on roads. Anyway, we have another creature of that ilk here, and that's our stormwater system is a problem. I see the creation of a stormwater utility as a way to avoid the need to raise ad valorem taxes $500,000 annually starting in 2016. This presentation is going to take about 15 minutes probably, but I'll work through it. This is a definition, this is Florida League of Cities, what a stormwater utility is. But a stormwater utility is a stormwater management program funded by user fee based on the fee payer's demand for the stormwater service. The program is defined by stormwater management activities such as flood and pollution control, permitting, inspection, maintenance, capital construction. The program's infrastructure consists of culverts, ditches, swales, and ponds, and are the asset of the stormwater utility. They are constructed and managed and operated according to the Florida regulation attached, using revenue from the stormwater utility fee. The synopsis of these regulations are at the end as appendices of this presentation. I won't go over them, but they're there. Stormwater utility fees are equitable. The user of the stormwater management system pay for the system's costs. The more a stormwater utility customer creates runoff that is discharged to the municipality's infrastructure, the more the customer benefits from the service of the infrastructure. This is the same as for other service funded by users such as drinking water or wastewater, for that matter. I'm inserting the word garbage. When municipal general fund revenues are used to fund stormwater programs, the property taxpayer pays into the general fund in proportion to the value of the property. As it is right now, the general fund is funding this particular activity, and my point is that I think we're going to have to raise taxes, whether you like it or not, $500,000 if we don't go at it this way, and I don't think that's fair. A stormwater utility, if properly implemented, can provide the funding necessary to operate the system the same way as a sewer utility. And in the city of Vero Beach, the management of the stormwater system has historically been funded through the general fund revenues, including ad valorem taxes, gas taxes, state sales tax, revenue sharing, and so on. The local government infrastructure surtax, 1 cent sales tax revenue also. Other project priorities, including debt service, as well as the need to meet unfunded stormwater treatment requirements, are taking a large portion of the 1 cent sales tax revenue, placing a strain on the stormwater budget. I think you'll remember this last year. We were trying to spend $200,000. We only could spend $100,000 because we had a collapsed culvert. I believe it was on 20th Avenue. Currently, the general fund provides revenue for the day-to-day operations and maintenance of the city's stormwater system and street sweeping. Street sweeping is an important part of stormwater management, by the way. Maintenance includes regular and periodic rear lot, ditch cleaning, clearing and grading, pipe cleaning, inlet cleaning, and so on. Additionally, treatment projects require a dedicated maintenance schedule for cleaning once they are placed in service. So take the baffle box at 19th Street as an example of that aforementioned. Stormwater system functions, this is give you some idea, but stormwater system maintenance, we're currently spending $700,000 a year funded from the various tax revenues down below, but most of it, 611, is coming from the ad valorem tax for what it's worth. We're also street sweeping. Street sweeping is very important because if you can sweep it up and not let it go down into the lagoons and the lateral canals and into the lagoon, you've done it at much lower cost than otherwise. In any case, this shows you where that $118,000 has come from. Compliance, which is paperwork that needs to be done, and NPDES administration is another function we must do. The fifth one, stormwater testing. Currently, we don't do very much, but we spend $25,000 on it. We need to do much more. If we have a stormwater utility, we really need to be prepared to spend the money to see if we made an improvement and where the best bucks were spent. In other words, we know that if you look at the causes of problems in estuaries, and if you use the Chesapeake, which I've studied in some detail, I mean, there are 4 or 5 things that can cause it. Agricultural runoff, street runoff, septic tanks, muck, air pollution, industrial pollution. We don't really have the last two. And when you talk about pollution coming from the streets or from coming from stormwater, what you have to realize is that starting in the with Disson, the Disson Saw guy in 1905 or 1910, what was done in Florida was to drain all the water off the land, so you can drive down US 1 and it'll never flood, but the water's got to go someplace. It goes into the lagoon, of course. I'm going to talk about the stormwater capital projects here in a minute in some detail. I actually won't talk about them in detail, but I'll show them to you. And of course, this $500,000, the mythical $500,000. The problem, much of the city's stormwater system is over 50 years old and reaching the end of the design lifespan. Examples of these types of projects that we've done recently include the 19th Street, 20th Avenue culvert replacement, which cost $100,000 and which collapsed this last year. The 16th Street culvert crossing. Upcoming projects include the 23rd Street and 20th Avenue culvert replacement, and of course the Vero Island stormwater system replacement, which is of major concern. Again, you know, what you're talking about here is we have a fair amount of deferred maintenance, and we're going to have to face it. Unfortunately, the increasing use of the 1-cent sales tax to fund debt service and other projects within the city leaves a smaller and shrinking share of funds for stormwater projects. And newer regulations may escalate city costs. And I think you'll remember when we did the budget this year, I was looking for a lot more money. We thought we had $200,000, and $200,000 isn't a drop in the bucket. We'll get to that in a minute. But, we only had 100 by the time we fixed the 19th, 20th Street. An immediate problem. We have a grant for approval, which will come forward, I believe, the next city council, Jim, or the one after?
Yes, I believe that's right.
We have a grant for approval of $224,000 for Original Town in McCamish Park. By the way, there are lots of grants available, but they're matching grants. In this particular case, it would handle 340 acres, and we would be able to have a modern stormwater system out of 800 acres going into the lateral E canal. That's the one that goes into the main relief canal. But the city will require the city providing matching funds of $448,000 in 2016. And if we don't provide the money, we can't get the 224. You know what that says, just for this project, which is a good problem. I mean, it's good to get $224,000 for Original Town and McCamish, but the problem is that it takes money to get the money. And, where are you going to get it from? You're going to get it cut someplace else in a very tight budget, and I've lived through 3 years on city council and 1 year in finance, and I got to tell you, the budget is tight. You can get it from a tax increase, which none of us want. $500,000 would represent a 12.5% tax increase for what it's worth in roundest terms. Or we can begin our stormwater utility and do this neighborhood first. And I think this is a good place to start, just as we started with the step system in the Bethel Creek area. I think we have our first target neighborhood to do what needs to be done. Stormwater capital projects have historically been funded out of the 1 cent sales tax revenue. Currently, there are $5.6 million in identified capital projects. See Table 1. Table 1 is inserted here. These projects include $4.5 million in projects identified as necessary in the near term, less than 5 years. And remember, we're putting in $200,000 a year against them, consisting of $2.2 million in required R&R projects and $2.3 million for pollution control projects, with another $1.1 million additional pollution control projects as fund becomes available. I mean, what we're talking about here is the life of the lagoon. Although I don't want to condition this presentation just on the lagoon. It's critical for the lagoon, but it's just as critical for the financing of the city and to fix the deferred problems we have in stormwater utility. At the current rate of $300,000 per year, and it really isn't 300. Last year it was 200. It'll take almost 19 years just to meet the $5.6 million that needs to be done in the next 5 years. In other words, the money's nowhere near in sight. These are the specific projects, and they're here. I'm not going to go over them in particular, although we can come back to them if someone's interested. And this slide is an estimate of the costs that it's going to take. These top are asterisks. The street sweeping is really labor. In other words, we deal with the street sweeper as a capital item. And NPDES, which I referred to a minute ago, is a discharge permit. And the $500,000 represents where we're $500,000 we don't have. It represents a shortfall between what we need to do in the coming year and what the cost would be. What is a modern stormwater system? Well, the first thing it does is prevent flooding. And all around this town, I know on Live Oak is an example. And around the city, there are examples of places that flood or have flooded, and we fixed some of them. We haven't fixed all of them. But the drains on the side of the street are replaced now with a permeable slab. It's called FlexiPave. I don't know whether there's any of it out in the lobby or not, but we had it here for the Utilities Commission. And it acts as a primary filter where solids remain on the surface. What it is it's a composite material. I believe it to be, Monty help me, but it's rubber tires and asphalt put together, and it's permeable. And so what happens is, instead of having the culvert in the side of the street that the water goes down, the water goes through this pad, which is pretty good size. I mean, these things are, in round terms, 4 feet by 2.5 feet, 3 feet, and they're placed in the street. And what happens is the solids, in other words, the leaves, the sticks, and all that material, remains on the surface. And they're more cheaply removed by street sweeping than they would be if we let them go down into the system, and then we had to put baffle boxes in place to catch them. So for McCamish and Original Town, this is, I think, what would be suggested by Public Works. I think this last one is really important, and I think it's important in anything we do, whether it's septics or anything we do. We have to monitor the water moving into the canals as to quality, and the results have to be logged. In other words, what I'm saying is, that we always get this question. In my own heart, I would tell you that I believe that 40% of our problem, at least in the city of Vero Beach, is stormwater, and another 40% is septic tanks. I can't prove it, but I think we need to be able to prove it as we move ahead. So as we do projects, it's critical that we be able to say what we have accomplished so that we know how to spend the best bucks. And I'll give you another example going back to the Chesapeake. What they did up there, and they still have problems. I go to the Chesapeake fairly frequently, and I work out of Annapolis, Maryland. But, they identified the 6 or 7 items that were causing problems. And what you want to do is you want to spend your money on the ones that are, as far as restoring an estuary, that are causing most of the problem. In other words, you want to find the 20% of the dollars you can spend that will get you 80% return. Interestingly enough, in the Chesapeake, after the industrial was cleaned up under EPA, what they found was that in that particular case, it was dairy farms in Pennsylvania, where I come from, actually exactly where I come from, and it was pig farms, and it was particularly chicken farms in the Delmarva. And when they cleaned that up, they made a mass improvement. But what they did is they monitored the outflow, for instance, from the Susquehanna, what was the improvement, and so on. So I think it's a critical element. I think you make a terrible mistake if you don't invest 5 or some percentage of your investment in knowing what you're doing and being able to prove that, or disprove, that it did what you thought it would do. The first thing I've already said, all water goes into the lagoon. Funding now is increasingly used to repair an aging and limited system. Currently, only about 1/3 of the city runoff is mitigated, and the current plan of 100 to 200,000 would only get us to about 2/3 of the water coming off of people's property in the streets. Only 2/3 of it would be and have any form of mitigation filtering in 19 years. That to me is unacceptable. I think our goal should be under this plan to get there and to get to that 67% in 5 years from the day we start. And of course, this project, much like the STEP system, from the day we're sitting here and talking about it, and if we make a policy decision, it'll take us a year to do all the things that need to be. So you're talking a ways off. These things are not quick. A stormwater utility, if properly implemented, can provide the funding necessary to operate and manage a stormwater system, much the same way that a sewer utility provides the means to operate and manage a sanitary sewer system. In the city of Vero Beach, the management of stormwater system has historically been funded through the general fund, and I've read that before. Other project priorities, including debt and street paving, are taking large portions. A stormwater utility is no different than garbage or sewage removal. The user pays for the removal. Think about it. You put your garbage out, you pay to remove it. You have sewers, the city puts in pipe, you pay to remove it. The only difference is this is much cheaper to accomplish than those particular functions. A stormwater utility would be set up as a separate enterprise fund. It would be an additional enterprise fund. Stormwater utility fees would accrue to all users of the stormwater system in accordance with the benefits received. As previously noted, general fund revenues fund the majority of the operations and maintenance. However, most of the general fund revenue are based on property values or retail sales, neither of which have any nexus to the use of or benefits provided by the stormwater system. Additionally, recent studies by staff have shown that almost 44% of the property in the city is considered tax exempt for the purpose of generating ad valorem tax. It is reasonable to assume that almost all these tax exempt properties contribute stormwater runoff. I mean, if you have a store, or if you have any other particular property, it's going to put stormwater runoff. Stormwater systems benefit from flood mitigation provided by the system. In other words, if you have a store, as an example, you don't want your parking lot flooded and the water's got to go someplace. A stormwater utility user fee would more evenly assess the costs for the stormwater service to everyone who benefits. In other words, instead of putting it on the back of the poor taxpayer, it would be put on the back of the user. Attached here is, see attachment B for Y of fee. It's Florida League of Cities. It's attached at the back. But essentially in the state of Florida, if you try to do it as a other than a fee attached to a utility bill, what happens is you have entities that claim that they don't have to pay it. One of the biggest, of course, is schools. We are this year sponsoring the Florida League of Cities, a restitution of that, whereby state law will change and schools will have to pay their share. But in much of Florida, about 30 counties, they don't, as a matter of fact. Also attached are the codes. The stormwater utility benefits, there are these 5 things that come from the utility fee: operation and maintenance, administration, which I think city councils should set a goal. I mean, after all, we have these people right now. In other words, we should be very careful that we don't eat up a lot of money in administration. I'm not smart enough to know what that should be. Pollution control and abatement, stormwater system improvements, and stormwater renewal and replacement. And we have a lot of replacement to do. It's going to take a lot of the money. A dedicated stormwater utility fee would provide a guaranteed and stable funding source for these necessary functions. A stormwater utility fee would ideally be charged to all benefiting properties, including those properties which are currently tax exempt, thereby distributing the cost based on the property's use of the system rather than its taxable value or retail sales volume. Any revenue generated by a stormwater utility fee could free up existing revenue. For instance, existing capital fund revenues could be used for other capital projects, including the state street maintenance program. We know we need $600,000 in streets. This year, I think we put in 200. This year, we put in 200 in this. We might be able to get the streets up to 400, but we've got a lot of deferred maintenance there. So there's some benefit because it allows us, if we fund this particular function, we can be concerned about other aging attributes we have in this town, like Leisure Square and the streets in particular. Most grant applications for stormwater-related projects, including a scoring component that gives preference to applications with a dedicated stormwater funding source. In other words, we cut ourselves out of a lot of possible funding. Attached to the appendix of this is the law that was just passed in Washington, and it specifically deals with how you can apply for federal low-interest loans if you meet certain constraints, one of which is having a stormwater utility. The steps needed. Okay, GIS is now underway, and I'm going to show that to you to determine lot percentage of imperviousness. Now, the state law on this is very specific. It's specific in that you have to go through the motions of knowing how much water a property really puts out into the general public. In other words, that has to be taken away. And that has to do with whether it's impervious. It has to do with area, and it's an area that takes more than a little bit of thought, and one probably beyond our ability. And essentially, we would have the first step in this would be hire a consultant to work with Public Works to design the utility to include the engineering, the fee structure. The fee structure would go into the percentage imperviousness, the size of the lot, and of course the financial structure of the enterprise that would be created. The consultant would be picked by an RFP process very similar to what we recently did with the audit selection. And the Utility and Finance Commission, much as they've done with the STEP system, once there was the beginnings of a enterprise, in other words, the bones of it, it would be thoroughly vetted by each of the commissions, and there would be a lot of questions asked. Is this the right way to go? We want to do this right. This is one of those things that will be with us a little while anyway. A final ordinance and resolution would eventually come to the City Council, much like the STEP system that we dealt with in the last meeting. In other words, all the details would be worked out, what the fees would be, what the requirements would be, and so on. And that would eventually come to us. And I would imagine that would take many months. It would take probably into the summer of this coming year, realistically, maybe longer, who knows. Whoops. This is just one of the pages of the GIS work, and it shows that we've been working on what we're dealing with as far as parcels of property, and what we have to deal with as far as particular kinds of property and so on. Don't ask me to explain it. Monty could, but I can't. Caveats. All funds must be used for stormwater. The stormwater utility would be an enterprise and monitored by the Utility Commission like any other utility. My proposal is for a 10-year period and then sunset it such that a future city council could end, modify, or extend it. And, you know, my belief is that once we get into it, it'll go on and needs to go on for the years ahead. But I always like a way to get out of things if that need be. And a stormwater utility may have an easier time securing grants. Reasonability, the writer, I wrote this, the writer believes no one can reasonably object to a $3 to $5 fee to prevent flooding in a lagoon. And I think the flooding in a lagoon, I mean, you know, the reality is if we continue to let culverts and pipes collapse, you have flooding. And I think this is every much as much to prevent flooding and fix infrastructure as at a lagoon. I think probably you all know that I'm a great advocate of doing what we have to do for the lagoon, but this is really a dual function project. The effort is to be strictly inside the city. In other words, that's the only place we really have the authority, and that's our obligation. But each segment of the system needs to have monitoring. I've already talked about that. Such a fee is a far better alternative than raising taxes next year, and I think we're going to be sitting here raising taxes $500,000. Such a fee charges the user, not just the property homeowner. A fee is the way to go so that all entities that receive the benefit of the service will have to pay. Some myths. A stormwater utility is just another tax aiding government. In fact, what is proposed is not a tax at all, but a fee-based service similar to your sewer, water, and garbage bills. And I don't know who would think a garbage bill was a tax, but I'm sure somebody will say that. Typically, no additional staff is necessary. Almost all existing stormwater functions are already grouped under one department and with one or two divisions. In other words, at least at inception, this is minimally cost administration and certainly is not a tax. A stormwater utility will increase costs for taxpayers. That's another myth. In fact, this could actually reduce tax rates by shifting the burden of providing this service to those who benefit from it rather than the general fund taxpayer. You know, if you're not paying property taxes, you're still putting water into the environment, and you need to be accountable for that, and at least I think you do. A stormwater utility is not a vehicle to fund capital projects. In fact, that is precisely what this would help accomplish. Capital projects for both lagoon restoration as well as necessary R&R projects, which are currently preventing full investment in lagoon cleanup projects. A properly established stormwater utility would set rates based on the funding needs and adjust those rates as necessary to either keep up with increased costs or reduce the rates to reflect lower needs, much the same way that the water and sewer and electric rates fluctuate and are monitored by our commissions and by ourselves. I think I want to put an asterisk in here. One of the things that will have to be determined, much as it was with the step system, is what the charge really is and how that really works. But at this point in time, if you just take mathematically $3 to $5 and you multiply it by the number of customers we have enough money really to make a material difference. Another myth is the lagoon would get less than $1.95 out of the $5 fee. Well, that's a complete myth. It is true that some of the benefit would be for flooding, but interestingly, even if it was $1.95 out of the $5 fee, it would represent 40% of the total water for stormwater related services. Under the current proposed 2014-15 budget, lagoon restoration projects are only getting $50,000, only $50,000, which I think is criminal. Out of the 1.2 million stormwater budget, or approximately 4.2%. That's all that's going to reduce the pollution in the lagoon. Stormwater utilities is inexpensive versus other similar activities. That's a truth, not a non-truth. 4 to 6 months seems like a lot just to take care of a little rainfall. That's the myth. To put that in perspective, the monthly sewer bill for a typical single-family house is $25 to $35. That's for about 10,000 gallons per month. The volume of stormwater runoff for the typical single-family home averages about the same volume per month. I realize there are months very high and very low. So we're talking about taking the sewage away for $25 to $35 and taking the water that is being dumped into the streets and in the environment for $46. I think that's a pretty good bargain. I think we have to catch up where a modern city should be. I don't like 19th century ideas. I guess it's or middle 20th century idea here in Vero Beach. But 158 of 410 Florida cities have a stormwater utility. I mean, this is not a new idea. In fact, the more major cities and the more prominent names certainly have a stormwater utility. Why we think we don't need one busts my mind. But stormwater utilities are also found in Sebastian and Felsmer, for what it's worth. And I think Vero Beach is long overdue in taking this step. It's something we should have done a long time ago. Anyway, tonight the writer is asking for a policy vote directing staff to go to the next step, which is to hire a consultant. And with that, I'll rest my presentation. I'll answer questions the best I can, but some of the questions probably either Jim or Monty can answer, or better, they did get a chance to preview this, and quite frankly, a lot of it I cribbed from Bill Messerschmidt or Monty's work or Jim's work or the Florida League of Cities. But I thought it was important to put it in front of you because the reality of it is we got our choice. We can raise taxes when the time comes next year, or we can face the fact that we've got to do something about this. Comments?
I just have a real quick comment. I really like the idea. The non-permeable surface thing really kind of perks my curiosity. I'd like to see more information on that because I don't understand how we could. I understand a lot of our roads are county and state roads. We would not be able to modify those roads to include the non-permeable surfaces when it comes to storm runoff, would we? We'd still have to have the state to do
Bonnie,
that.
Bonnie, I have to answer that.
Good evening, Council. Monty Falls, Director of Public Works. I would make the recommendation that we focus our dollars on our roadways first and try to encourage those other jurisdictions to do the same on their drainage facilities as we were able to get DOT to actually participate in some drainage improvements along Indian River Boulevard by putting some baffle boxes in a project that they did on State Road 60 there, but to try to leverage our money and our funds on city roadways first.
This comment too, Jay, what you're really faced with is in original town in McCamish, what we'd be talking about is this would be the system. However, if you take the 19th Street, which Monty was just talking about, it's a beautiful new installation that's across from the power plant. That particular baffle box is draining a good many acres that stretch possibly as far as this particular building. And, we're still stuck with the outfalls in the city. So what happens is, what I'm trying to say is, we will have instances as we move along where we will have to put baffle boxes in to discharge our responsibility, but this money can be used for whatever is the best approach. So what would happen is there's certainly water coming off US 1 going down the canal on 19th Street, and we're stuck with it. But we're trying to do something about it, and under this proposal, we would be able to use baffle boxes or whatever the technology were at the time.
So my understanding is that we would bill according to non-permeable surface area, and then like the state or the county, they would then pay into that fund in order to pay for those projects along those roads?
It would be based on the private properties that contribute water into this drainage systems. If there was a county-owned facility that put drainage into a city system, then they would have a component of the drainage associated with that property. But I think what you're talking about is the right of way. That's the county right of way and the state right of way inside the city limits.
Right.
And again, my suggestion would be that we would work with them to try to get them to do things to their system, and we'll use our dollars on our systems first, and then if we can't, we then move forward with those later.
Okay.
Questions, comments?
I was going to say once again, I'm still having trouble. This is, to me, a tax. No matter you want to call it a fee, whatever else. Who do you think is going to be paying this? But the regular taxpayers of Vero Beach, they're the ones that are there. They say, oh, you're going to collect all these users that aren't paying for the service now. Well, you quote 44%. Well, 25% of that is the airport. 4% is city parks. But yes, we might be able to hit up those 15% of our churches that don't pay ad valorem taxes. You know, that's the only other group that you're picking up with the stormwater and saying that it's, a user fee. There is no question we have some challenges, both in protecting our lagoon and in preparing our infrastructure. But we need to seek out other solutions. As we eliminate the debt of the Dodgertown Pines property, able to get that off. Right now, that's consuming around $600,000 a year that we could be putting to other projects without creating another part of government, another utility, and more taxes. I think we still have to continue to explore. Economy is starting to improve. We're seeing a little bit of increase in the valuations of ad valorem taxes. Sales taxes are going up. So there's a lot of things before you jump into creating what I think, is another monster, more government. Utilities, you hope that they're self-sustaining, but let's look at our enterprise funds that we have in the city. We have the cemetery, which is not self-sustaining. We have the marina, which barely returns about $100,000 to the general fund. And if we actually did a balance sheet on these entities and we included their unfunded pension liability and their other post-employment benefits, I think you'd see a whole different picture of these entities. I mean, let's keep the transparency in government. If we need to raise taxes, we need funds, let's put it up front, leave it up to the voters. I mean, it's certainly suspicious this comes up the day after election that looking at another tax increase. So I am opposed to the concept.
Well, I just want to refute one point. I've been talking about this for 6 months, and it was on the agenda for just before the election. We've actually had one meeting where we talked about it, and we had a general direction that it was worth thinking about. And I would make one other comment. Tonight, what I'm looking for is a policy decision directing the staff to go to the next step. But that doesn't make this happen. That makes this start to happen. There are going to be numbers of steps, no different than what we were talking about with the electric, that we're going to have to judge and judge those well. But I think it is absolutely needed, and I don't know why we're different from other modern cities. I really don't. We need to have public comment in this. Yes, ma'am.
My name is Deborah Ecker. I reside at 550 Rio Mar Drive in Vero Beach, and I'm speaking on behalf of the Indian River Neighborhood Association. Our organization strongly supports this authorization of a utility, the revenues of which would be used to for the installation of cleanup facilities, for stormwater runoff into the lagoon, and in some instances for new pipes. I found the documentation that was provided for this by Mr. William Messersmith last July to be really remarkable. I don't know when I've seen such a thorough documentation for the specific needs and remedies accompanying a proposed environmental correction project. Just reading the descriptions, the projects go on. The descriptions of his projects take about 2 or 3 pages, and just reading those demonstrate the need for this utility. I'm just going to quote 2 examples. One, Vero Isles has 15 small outlet pipes that are discharging directly into the lagoon with no pollution abatements. In the case of that area, it would require, apparently there are 60-year-old pipes there now, and the pipes would have to be replaced, and that would be really one of the more expensive projects. But imagine it, 15 outlet pipes with no pollution abatements whatsoever, just going directly into the lagoon. On the larger dimension, an example is the lateral E canal drainage. There are 882 acres in that drainage area, and 764 are within the city's boundaries. And this drainage area has 53 outfall pipes that are going into the ditches and the canals that then, as we know, flow directly into the lagoon. And these bring with them the nutrients and vegetative materials, leaves and grass clippings that are causing major damage to the lagoon. The solution that is proposed here is for this new product that Mr. Winger mentioned, this product called FlexiPave, which is essentially a composite of rubber and other used items, and that is projected to be 80%. It would be 80% effective in preventing the pollution into the lagoon. Altogether, Mr. Messersmith specifies 16 projects for which the utilities' free revenues would be used. The proposed revenues, the documentation is just incredible. I mean, this isn't just a project of a good idea without any backup and any details of exactly what the problems are out there within the city limits, and exactly what remedies, whether it's the boxes, new boxes, or whether it's this new a product called FlexiPave, or in some cases new pipes. I think it's just a remarkable proposal. And I also want to congratulate your mayor for his very fine presentation. It makes any comment from the public really unnecessary. I also want to congratulate whoever found this article, this statute in the legislature. This was 1986 that this was adopted, and that was years before we recognized all the problems that we have now. I just can't tell you how important I think this is for this lagoon. This is an essential economic and aesthetic body of water for this city. I just don't see how you have any choice but to proceed with this. We strongly urge you to adopt this, and recognizing that it's not going to take place right away, that it's going to require a consultant to work out how the fee system would work, how the measurement of the areas that would be assessed would be conducted. But get going on it. It's terrific. Thank you.
I wish I had known you this morning when I was pulling together what I had, because you have some wonderful material. You had more than I had. Thank you.
No, I'm sure that's not the case.
Further public comment? Seeing none, I'll close public comment. I would like to make a motion to direct a policy decision directing staff to go to the next steps, which would include hiring a consultant.
I'll second.
Any further comment?
I want to make sure that as we go through this process, we are making an incredible effort to get the word out in the community so that we can hear back from the citizens. I know Vice Mayor Kramer stated a concern with the implementation of the STEP process, and I want to make sure that we do everything we can to hear people. So I would support this with the caveat that we work really hard on making sure that we're publicizing this and getting the word out.
Yeah, I couldn't concur with you more because, I mean, we're here to serve. Well, old adage is, government is that which protects man from man. And unfortunately, we need government. But government is also has to step in and protect the environment from man. But man, Mrs. Turner would agree with me, man has to be protected from government. And I think it's important what you just said to me. I think it's very wise that, I intend to carry this forward and try to get it publicized as much as possible. But I think that's very, very important because, after all, it's God's lagoon, I guess, and it's our town, and the people of the town certainly should be fully apprised. I couldn't agree more.
I have a feeling that this is something that's going to require funding going forward for a long time annually. And I think, you were talking about putting an end to it, but that it may go on. And I think this is going to go on for a long time. And having a good source of revenue for it, I think this is an obvious way to do it. And this is the first time I've seen it, but I'm very impressed by it. I think it's something that has a lot of merit.
I have a question to the city manager. Now, when they establish the ERUs, aren't there sometimes specific credits for improvements to your property that decreases the amount of pavement? For example, people can bring down the cost assessed to them by making more environmentally friendly improvements to their property.
Yes, ma'am. That's exactly how I understand it, and that's why the study has to be done in conformance with state law that determines what the ERUs are, what is the impact, and then how those would be imposed, and then what credits would be given back. Because the theory is you're charging a fee for a discharge into the public rights of way that the public has to maintain.
Okay, so we could work on making sure we publicize too improvements that people can make to their property.
Just so everybody knows, we're not going to have a consultant in here tomorrow.
Right.
We got an awful lot of work that's going to be done, and Public Works is going to have to do a lot of preparation before we actually bring someone on. And if this is the direction the council is going, I would like to make sure that I fully understand what Sebastian's how they arrived at their consulting firm and what takes place, because you can really mess one of these things up, and we just don't want to put ourselves in that position.
Right.
All right, with that, I think we should have Mrs. Bach, you should call the roll. I'll call the motion.
Okay, Mr. Roll?
Yes.
Ms. Graves?
Yes.
Mrs. Turner?
No.
Mr. Kramer?
Yes.
Mayor Winger?
Yes,
Passes 4-1.
4-0. I have another one of these for you, but I'm probably not that well equipped to deal with it. But we have the short-term rental situation, and this is one of these things like at the budget session, or we did earlier on the electric, that we have to have our conversation under the Sunshine Law in the public. My own belief is, okay, we had a legal decision, but it was a one-word decision, and I believe we should go ahead and do two things. One or three things, and what I'm dealing with here is the third of the three things. The first thing is I think we should start enforcing our law, period. The second thing I think we should do to the degree that it's permissible under state code, if there is wording that we can amend in the code without changing the code. For instance, what does the word transient mean? I don't know whether we can do that or not, but I think council need be directed to consider that consequence. The third thing that I think needs to be done, and I would be willing to do it if someone's smarter than me and legally competent, and that's one of the things I'm not competent in, one of the many, I guess, would put together a presentation. But I would like to take it back to the Florida League of Cities and say what we had out there last year that you changed, we still want it. So I'm asking for a consensus. Well, I'm asking for discussion on those three things. The first one being, should we go forward enforcing? The second one being, should we have Wayne look at the strongest wording we can have and without undoing our grandfathered position? And thirdly, I'm asking for permission for Peggy and Wayne to write something that I'm going to present. So I leave it to you. I think it needs to be done.
I don't understand where we stand with enforcing. Are we able to enforce now?
Not if we want to be sued. That's it.
Yeah.
Well, the ruling that came down, Wayne, why don't you answer that one?
The way we've looked at it, and as you know, Susan Trevarthen was the legal counsel that handled the appeal, and she's of the opinion, and I agree with her, that because of the opinion that was given, it really only affects that set of circumstances and facts that were presented to the court, because the court didn't go further and actually declare our ordinance unconstitutional or vague or what have you. It just upheld the decision of the Code Enforcement Board. There are, in fact, right in front of me, some proposed amendments that Mr. McGarry has worked on, which I am reviewing. And it's not a lot. It's not real extensive. And, in fact, those suggested changes Susan Trevarthen looked at also. And this is what she has recommended that we do, too. I would propose that let's at least adopt these clarification measures before you actually go out and start writing citations. That would be my recommendation. Because otherwise you're stuck with what's on the books, and they're going to try the same tact again if someone chooses to contest it. I mean, that's up to them if they want to. We never know if someone's going to contest it or not. But I think we've got something that would be helpful in clarification. Plus, we'll be bringing to you some clarification in the Code Enforcement Ordinance that clarifies the Code Board. There was a bit of a conflict in the ordinance where in one case it actually gave the ability to appeal an administrative interpretation of a code provision that gave the ability to a violator. But if they didn't, then basically it was left to the Code Enforcement Board to do any interpretation. So what we would we'll be bringing back and proposing is to clarify that if they want to contest the interpretation of the code provision, they must take the administrative appeal on the interpretation, which in a case like that in particular was a land use regulation. So that appeal would go to the Planning and Zoning Board, and then ultimately, if it was appealed again, it would come to this council. Then the Code Enforcement Board would be bound by the interpretation that was administratively made, and they would just have to apply the law. They wouldn't be able to interpret it a different way. So that's another change we'll be probably simultaneously be bringing to you, and we should have that for first reading in front of you December 2nd.
Is that acceptable to council? It is to me, certainly.
I think you have to do it that way.
We have to start there, I agree.
Amelia?
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
Is it acceptable?
And Mayor, Peggy and I be, of course, as you know, happy to work with you on a presentation on.
Well, I snicker at that because you're going to have to do the presentation. I can read it, but that's about it.
Well, Peggy and I might have to flip a coin.
Is that acceptable that we, I don't know what our odds will be, but we'll have the Florida League of Cities behind us, although it's not one of their key provisions this year. I failed in accomplishing that, I'm sorry to say, but I tried.
You had a tough real estate lobby on them too, so.
Okay, so we'll plan on that. There will be a presentation, and we'll file that form with Mrs. Mayfield also. I believe that concludes the items on the agenda. I don't have the agenda in front of me anymore. And so I guess we're on to individual council members. And thank you for indulging me tonight. I had more to say than I normally do, but I think it was a good session, and that we got on the same page on many issues, and I think that's important, and we have to do that in the sunshine. I attended the Florida League of Cities, and one thing that's going to change next year, so you know, for 2016, the whole legislative process is going to be speeded up 6 months. So we're going to, in 1 year, get 2 passes at the legislature, which will be highly entertaining. Well, I can't explain it. I got a schedule that I can give you, but beyond the schedule, I can't understand it. But essentially, they've changed the rules, and you know Tallahassee. The rules changed in Tallahassee fairly easily, I guess. The second thing is Jay and I were very privileged to cut the ribbon at the dog park, and you know, I thought it was a lot of fun. I think Jay concurs with me, and a lot of happy dogs and people, and a lot of comradeship, and you know, that's a good thing. I liked the fence that they put along the river, and you know, they have great plans for putting lots of trees out there, which I think would be a good thing. Lastly, my last comment is this last week I had a wonderful opportunity to appreciate really a treasure that we have in Vero Beach, which is this historic Dodger town. And I was invited out there to actually do a day of training last Sunday a week ago. It'd be Sunday a week ago. And I've never played baseball in my life, as a matter of fact, but I was in the batting cage, and I was taking ground balls from John Underwood, and my batting coach was Tommy Davis, who was you know, an all-star, to say the least. And we got to have, Bobby and I got to have dinner with them Thursday night, and have them tell all of their stories about their careers. And I played in the game Friday. I bragged that I grounded out twice. Actually, I struck out twice too. But this is, you know, but what it makes me appreciate is, I mean, these people come back. There were about 10 major leaguers: Maury Wills, Tommy Davis, Steve Yeager, and on and on. And I'm sorry, I won't get all the names. And there were about 10 major league coaches. And then Guy Wendell, this is his 58th fantasy camp. He started in 1948, but we haven't had one for the last couple of years, the last few years. I gave him a key to the city because he's just a great guy. But what it made me appreciate is how important our baseball heritage is, and how important anything we can do to support historic Dodger Town is. I mean, to me, just having a chance to know some of those guys and listen to their interchange back and forth, it was a wonderful experience for me, and I thank you for letting me share it with you. And I just think that historic Dodger Town is a treasure. It really, really is. I'll pass the comments to Mr. Kramer.
Well, you know, I did want to start with the dog park. It went off very well. Every time I go back there, I see more and more people there. One interesting thing is that we did have the chili cook-off this year down in Riverside. Really appreciated all the people that came out. I know there was a little bit of rain there, but people stuck through it, and the amount of participation that was there was great, and it was good to come out and support the firefighters. And I'll leave it with that.
My turn.
Well, how are we going to do this now? I guess Ms. Turner should be next.
Did you want to remind everybody else about the environmental impact statement comments for the railroad? I did attend that review. I guess I use the word loosely. Anyway, but please, it's just vitally important. The more voices we get heard up at the FRA, the stronger our case is. Wanted to thank the Veterans Committee for a wonderful ceremony honoring our veterans. It was really lovely this particular Veterans Day to see them acknowledge the contribution of so many members within the city. Chief Curry, Don Dexter from Public Works, Bob Gracco, all those that work so hard to try to keep Memorial Island the beautiful place it is were recognized. So that was a great tribute. I also was at Dodgertown for the presentation of the historical marker that Ruth Stambridge and the Historical Preservation Committee have worked so hard and long on trying to get that through the legislative process. And so I encourage all of you, when you're out at Dodgertown, please don't miss this marker. And it's beautifully worded on some of the history of Dodgertown. And for all of y'all who want ready to get into the holiday spirit, this weekend there'll be the Festival of Trees at the Children's Riverside Theater. I think it's Saturday and Sunday from 10 to 5. And I want to wish you all a very, very happy Thanksgiving. Hope that we're all at home with loved ones and able to count our blessings. Thank you.
Ms. Graves?
I wanted to coattail on to Mrs. Turner's comments about Veterans Day. It was absolutely incredible, and I also I appreciate all of the private buy-in as well. Palm Gardens brought golf carts so they could bring veterans onto the island who had some difficulty walking, so everyone was able to attend. I wanted to encourage everybody to attend Downtown Friday, Christmas in Downtown, November 28th, 5:30 to 8:30 p.m. And then Saturday, November 29th is Small Business Saturday. So if you're out there doing your shopping for Christmas, please don't forget all of the small businesses in the city, and please patronize them, or patronage. Anyway, just shop there.
Mr. Old.
Thank you for this first time. I feel a little bit lost. I feel a little bit clumsy up here, but it's been interesting, and I'm looking forward to going forward with this. I wonder if there's some way we could do a planning session once in a while, once a quarter, once something like that, where we could sit around and discuss our dreams for the city, or our dreams or our ideas, and have other people say, well, those dreams aren't that great. Let's try something else. But I wonder if there's some way we could do some discussion rather than just sitting up here and reacting to things. But I, as a new guy on the block, would love something like that. So,
well, it's certainly something that we all suffer from, because you probably know we're one of the most transparent cities in the state of Florida, and we've been honored as such. And it's certainly something we all struggle with. I mean, there's things I would, love to tell you, or Pilar, or Jay, or Amelia, and I don't know what the solution is. I mean, tonight we've had more of that kind of discussion than we normally do, and not nearly enough, really. I mean, here we are embarked on a number of projects, and we haven't fully talked out the strategy of them.
The budget workshop that I saw, when we all sat around the table, or you all sat around the table and kicked around what was good and bad about each department and what we should do with the budget thing, I thought was very effective. It was certainly public, and it was certainly a discussion, and I thought that had a lot of merit to it. Maybe
that's one of them, but maybe every 90 days or something we could certainly have a special call or whatever.
Do a workshop,
do a workshop.
Yeah. For me, that would be really helpful, and I'm obviously not the only reason to do it, but I just think it would be a great idea.
If you all would like to do it in January, after the holidays, I mean, it would be just a question of Tammy finding dates, and any three can call it, or I'll call it, whoever, or Jay could call it, whatever.
Yeah, great.
But, I mean, is that okay, Amelia, with you?
I think it's a good idea. I think having kind of the policy of the city and different things going forward just once a year, I think we could benefit from quarterly talks with one another, not so formal where you can round table and really work together. Yeah. I think it would be, and get citizen input, I think it'd be great.
Yeah.
Another thing about it too, I mean, what happens is, like Amelia worked on the referendum that passed very nicely. And we all work on specific projects. I tend to work on infrastructure and utilities, really. And the problem is I feel uncomfortable sometimes. I know more about it than I've shared, and that's really not right.
But there isn't the opportunity to share. I mean, you're not allowed to.
Yeah. Well, why don't you think about that then, Mrs. Bach, and find a date that's acceptable to everybody, and I'll call a special call meeting or a workshop it will be.
Great.
Looking in January.
In January, yeah. With that, I have a motion to stand adjourned.
I'll second that.
We're adjourned, and thank you very much. I think it's been a productive evening.